Good afternoon. We're going to call this to order. It's 1 o'clock. And if we could just please have our land acknowledgement. No, Brad. Can you turn your mic on, please, Mr. Toon?
There we go.
Thank you.
Boki, welcome to our division office located on the traditional land and territory of the Niitsitapi, Piikani, Kainai, and Siksika, the Blackfoot people, within the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta.
Thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda. Can I get someone to make the motion that the April 8th, 2020 consent agenda be approved by the Board of Trustees as presented or amended? Mr. Long? All in favor? Emergent changes to the agenda. Can I get someone to make the motion that the, yeah, we will. I'm going to add to it. I just wanted someone to make the motion and then we'll. Okay. Be approved by the board as presented or amended. I'd like to make one amendment. I'd like to add in E5 that there'll be changes to our regular board meetings, that they will all be electronically. We will no longer be present, that all board meetings in the future will be electronic means for the rest of the school year. Yes. Can I get someone to, no, I already, so we already did the motion. Can I, all in favor? As amended, yes, thank you. That we're no longer going to be in person. Any declaration of conflict of interest? Seeing none. Moving on to our action items. E1, our 2020-2021 instructional funding allocation formula. It's the recommendation that the Board of Trustees approve the instructional funding allocation formula as presented for the 2020-2021 school year. Can I get someone to make that motion, please? Trustee Poitras? Mr. Perry?
Okay, thank you. So what you have before you, which is on the screen, unfortunately you weren't able to get a copy of this document prior to today's meeting, is the draft instructional funding allocation formula. This is a document that we typically bring every year after we've gone through a process to evaluate how we currently allocate funds from the revenues that we receive to our schools and other program areas. And typically we would have brought this document to you in March, but given the desire for stakeholder feedback on the new budgeting process and the new funding framework, we gave a little bit more time to be able to understand what those desires were, and so I think those might be talked about a little bit later, but I'll go through the instructional funding allocation formula and any minor changes that we've made. It's important to realize that in the upcoming year, the funding that we will receive at this point is similar to what we've received this year. And so no major changes have been recommended for this instructional funding allocation formula. In future years, there could be some changes, but at this point for the upcoming year, even though the renewed funding framework has changed, the way we get our funds has changed, the funding amount as committed to by the provincial government is going to be similar to what we had this year, and so not a lot of changes have been recommended. So number one is the allocation of teaching positions. This is no different from prior years in that we, as a division, have gone away from just allocating the funds out, and we've allocated the teaching positions to schools. First of all, based on a formula that takes into consideration many things. First of all, class size, which we know is an important area based on some of the feedback that we received. And this takes into consideration the Alberta Learning Commission guidelines on class size, which were the original class size levels that were recommended. It also takes into account time free from instruction for teachers to prepare time for administration of the school, for learning support and other program requirements as well. Number two, we allocate out to schools support staff positions. A few years ago, we moved to this as well to identify the need and to ensure that staffing levels were consistent across the jurisdiction, recognizing that even small schools have a need for certain fixed positions within their school. And so this would include administrative assistants, learning common facilitators, learning support educational assistants, child youth care workers, and this year we added to this speech assistants, whereas before we would have allocated a dollar amount, but again recognizing that we want to ensure that the needs are met in the different areas, it's going to be, or it's recommended to be, that we add this to being allocated as a position. Number three, and this is familiar with what we have followed in the past, the basic ECS to grade 12 allocation is basically taking the funding that we receive and removing other components off of the entire funding that have been allocated to transportation, plant operation and maintenance and administration, as well as the instructional pool, which is items that we centralize in order to maximize the resources and ensure that no particular school is disadvantaged. And so for an example, an area that would come out of instructional pool would be substitute teachers. So if there was potential sick leave in any area, if it was 2 or 3 individuals and they all came from one school, that would disadvantage a school. Whereas if it comes from a central pool, then it doesn't particularly disadvantage that school. So number 4, basic home education allocation is no change to that, where we allocate the resources where the home education program is being provided. English as a second language hasn't changed, although the formula as to how we allocate that will change a little bit, because the new funding framework isn't based on the actual number of ESL students that we have, but it's based on projection as well as past history of numbers of students. And so we anticipate taking the funds and dividing them by the number of ESL students and send out the proportionate amount to each of the schools that it applies to. So that's a small change there, only because of the way that we receive funds. So if we move to number 6, number 6 is a new statement, only because we've done this in the past, but it's come out of an instructional pool. But we thought it was important to recognize the commitment and the priority of the board in the FNMI area, and that is that we allocate a set amount to schools with larger populations of FNMI students to provide supports and resources for student success. And we leave that, the reason we allocate that out in an amount is that the school is in the best position to identify the needs and be able to respond to those needs. So that is how we have done it this time, or how we have done it in the past, but we've added this comment into our instructional allocation formula. Hutterite Colony School allocation, there's a colony allocation that we get related to each school, colony school, and we send those dollars out to the colony budget, as well as the basic allocation, recognizing that, and then taking off the certificated staff and support staff that we would allocate based on other means to them. Small school allocation is just a calculation that we have used historically to recognize the lack of economies of scale in some of our small schools, and so we allocate another amount in this allocation to assist those small schools to ensure they have sufficient to meet their needs. And number 9 is just a statement that we've made in the past, and this gives management the ability to adjust and meet some of the needs that are context-based out at the school level where necessary. So we've had that statement in there for quite some time. So that is, again, like I say, not major changes, but some minor changes that more accurately reflect how we receive funds and how we anticipate meeting the needs in the context of each school. So, Madam Chair, if there's any questions, I can certainly answer those at this time.
Any questions? Nope, I guess you get off free today, Jeff. Thank you for that. It's great to see the reflection of our new funding allocation now into this. And so this is just going to be approved and then sent to the government now, is that?
No, this we will share with our administrators, and then we
Administrators.
will apply this as we apply the allocations out to the schools.
Right, okay. Thank you. All in favor? Pass, thank you. Okay, moving on to E2, board policies. Recommendation that the Board of Trustees approve the changes to Board Policy 3, Board Policy 9, and Board Policy 13 as presented or amended. Can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Yegas? I'll turn it over to Trustee Toon and Trustee Yegas to go take us through these, please. Please speak into your mics.
If we look at Board Policy 3, I'm following the one with the red on it, so the one that's in Google Drive, so this one, oh, it does have red on it. Oh, okay, didn't on the, I can't see. Okay, we did some changes on this according to when we changed the role of the superintendent also. So if you could just follow along with it, the changes are pretty, as I said, they're correlate with that one. The first one is accountability for students' learning and wellness. And we then identified the priorities within this. Do you want me to read them over, or do you want to read them over yourself?
I think everybody should have read it over in the package. So
Yeah, they should have. Okay.
if they have any questions, then please feel free to ask Trustee Yegas.
And keep in mind, this is how we're going to be evaluated as a board. The next one, accountability to the provincial government, there was no changes on that one. And the next one was community assurance. Okay. Once again, are there any questions on this? Okay. The next one was political advocacy. Any questions? And policy. We added 2 on to that one. The next one was board superintendent relations, and we did a few changes when we added D onto that one. D and F. The next one was board development. We just did some changes on there. This was just some things we had to take out. 8, the next one, I won't say the number because I don't know if it's right, but the next one was fiscal accountability. And this was pretty straightforward, except the appoint an audit committee, which we were told we had to do under the new Education Act, and then receive the audit report, and then the borrowing resolution. Okay, and then we have some shared responsibilities. We took out celebrations and put it under here somewhere. And you will see that a lot of these shared responsibilities are the same, but they approved the school attendance. We added a few onto it, encourage the formation of a regional school council, locally developed courses, and hear appeals. And then, of course, we put down all the areas that we got information from, which is getting more and more every time we change a policy. Any questions on the policy?
Trustee Poitras? Just pull it to, there you go.
There you go. What does approved school attendance areas mean?
Well, those are the areas for each of the,
The boundaries.
the
Oh.
boundaries. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Where students
Where
attend
students
schools.
go to each school, yeah. Okay. Okay, then there's the appendix for that, and there was changes to this, and I think,
Trustee Long just has a question.
oh, okay.
Yeah, Trustee Poitras pointed that out, and I wonder if approved school attendance boundaries wouldn't be better than areas.
Is there anybody opposed to putting that in there? Did you have a comment? Yeah. Yeah, we can take that back and we can just make that change now.
Okay.
And then in the final version, as it goes forward, we'll just have that change made. Great, thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, I keep forgetting to look to my left here. I'm not used to having everybody so spread out. Yeah, okay.
Now, there are changes to the appendix on this, and this is our performance assessment guide. I'm going to let each of you read these over. They're based upon what we talked about in the policy, but they're the quality and the evaluation indicators of how we're going to be evaluated. And I think it's probably going to make a lot more sense after we do our first evaluation where we actually go through each of these. So I'm going to assume everybody read them over, and are there any questions on any of those?
Nope, seeing none.
Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to let Mr. Trustee Toon go and do policy 9.
Thank you. So when previously the board approved the audit committee terms of reference, that facilitated a need to weave it into our policy 9 committee of the board. And so if you scroll down, you can see there, audit committee. We formatted the powers and duties purpose and powers and duties similarly to the other committees of the board, pulling that directly from those terms of reference, and then added the appendix as Appendix A. That way, if there is any changes to structure or anything that needs to change with the audit committee, it's easy to do that. Having had an audit committee previously, that was just the committee of the whole as the board. Adding external members with the Education Act will change the operation of it. So again, as Trustee Yigas said, it might take going through this one time before we really see what changes need to be made. And those would, of course, come back to the board for recommendation and approval. But this is basically just interweaving the terms of reference that we approved as a board into our policy.
Trustee Poitras?
I just had a question about membership. It says the audit committee shall consist of 3 trustees, one of whom shall act as chair of the audit committee, and 2 members of the general public. How will those members be selected, and how will those positions be made out to the public?
So we'll be meeting as an audit committee after this to discuss and go over the advertisement of how to do that, because that's never previously been done by our board, but other boards have done that, had external people on their committee for a while, so.
Trustee Yegus?
I think in the appendix, they tell you how it's supposed to be done, because there was quite a bit of information on that. That was, when they did the original reference, we then put that all in the appendix so that it would be spelled out. So if you go to the appendix, I'm sure you'll find it.
I did see that in there. I just felt like if I was a brand-new board member and I was on this and no one else had been on it, it wasn't completely clear in there. But I do know that once we've been through it, if it needs to be tweaked or added to, of course, because it's a brand-new one. So, thank you.
Trustee Toon?
One of the reasons why it doesn't encompass the entire terms of reference, because the audit committee has a rather lengthy compared to all our other committees. And really that is because we're gonna have external people involved with that, so we needed the code of conduct that is in place for that committee clear to the members, because we'll give them a copy of the appendix when we're advertising it, so that they can see all what that entails, their roles and responsibilities.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. The last policy we had here is policy 13. And I must mention, I missed one of the meetings, and Daryl and Lori and Brad did a lot of, oh, no, Daryl, Lori, and John.
Yeah.
And then Daryl, Lori, and I don't know who else, Brad, I think. They did a lot of work on this. I think they sat for a whole afternoon, so I'm going to thank them for this. The role of the superintendent, what they did is they actually took the quality, what do you call
The
that?
Superintendent quality
Yeah,
standards.
yeah, superintendent quality
Leadership
indicators.
quality standards.
And they went through it, and they just went the way it was, so that we could get everything in there. So if you take a look at it, the first one, it says building effective relationships. Now, you're going to find that this is quite different from our superintendent evaluation that we had, the original one. And I'm just going to ask if anybody has any questions on that one.
No?
The second part was modeling commitment to professional learning. The third one, if there's no questions, was visionary leadership or walking on water. Any questions?
Nope. Just continue on, yeah.
Next one was leading learning. And then ensuring First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education for all students. The next one was school authority operations and resources.
Trustee McKee just has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
As you can see that a lot of the titles on there have been changed. And like I said, that came, a lot of those titles came from the superintendent leadership quality standards. And if you go through that document, we pulled a lot of the subtitles from that, and they became part of this policy. So if you're wondering how we came up with all these subtitles, it's based on this leadership quality standard document.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next one was school authority operation and resources. Of course, that would have been the fiscal responsibility one. And the next one, yeah. We didn't put a title on there. Was there a reason that we didn't have a title on it? We'll have to look at that one. Could we please mark it? Anyhow, that was the whole, what is referred to as an executive officer and a chief education officer. And the achievement of this competency is demonstrated by, and then they give you all of the,
So number 7? Should have been supporting effective governance.
okay, what was it called?
Supporting effective governance.
Okay. Did you get that,
Yeah, Nikki got it.
Nikki? Thank
Nikki
you.
has it, not got it.
Thank you. And then, of course, we took all the rest of them out. And then put the legal references and the dates. And then finally, the appendix, which is what we're going to be evaluating our superintendent on in the next one. And we're going to let Daryl go through that, and when he has to do his evaluations, and he's going to find how much he can or cannot do. That's sorry, but basically, I think until we use it once, it's pretty hard to say how effective this is going to be, or how realistic, I guess we could also say it's going to be. But as I said, it came from the superintendent teaching quality superintendent quality
Leadership.
standards, leadership. Thank you, standards. So this is what is expected of them.
Yep.
Are there any questions? Oh, we got one from Ms.
Trustee
Trustee.
Poitras?
I don't have a question. I just want to say when I first got this one and started reading through it, there was a lot of red. But I think that all the changes, the wording is very thoughtful and very clear. And when I looked at what it was and what it is now, I felt like the work that you guys have done was so important because it's so much clearer now and just the wording is excellent. So I wanted to thank you guys and tell you that I think it just looks wonderful. Even it was a lot to read through, but your time was well spent. So thank you to the policy committee.
And I really want to thank the members of that policy committee for doing a lot of this work. So thank you.
Thanks. I will say this one was a very big one. And so we did spend our whole policy committee that day, I think, working on this one and making sure that we got it right because there may be tweaks down the road, but we wanted to make sure that if we're going to evaluate, that we're evaluating in line with the leadership quality standards and that we're all on the same page. So, yeah, thanks. If there's no other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Passed. All right, on to E3, our ad hoc committee COVID-19. Recommendation that the Board of Trustees form an ad hoc COVID-19 committee consisting of the chair, superintendent designate, and 2 trustees commencing immediately. Can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Poitras? Would you like to speak to it?
I would. So when the idea of having an ad hoc committee, I'm not centered, sorry, Nikki, first came up, I had a lot of questions around it and did not fully understand. So I went ahead and looked into it, more into what Brownlee was recommending, and the exact recommendations for this COVID ad hoc committee would be specifically to look over the policies that we currently have in place and see if there's any that need to be addressed or amended to accommodate the current circumstances that we have going on. And each board should have an emergency preparedness plan. And this is something that would also need to be looked at as we are going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and some of the policies may be changing, and some of our preparedness plan, we may need to be making notes, taking notes, gathering information from what other divisions are doing, and making sure that our preparedness plan is as full as possible. When I first looked at this, I thought, can our policy committee do that? I know that our policy committee has a lot on the agenda right now. And so I think to have a committee to go through our policies with a fine-tooth comb specifically looking for these things would be a great idea. Also, it would involve the superintendent and the chair. And to be able to have a folder of types that we can gather information on other preparedness plans, what's working, what's not working in ours, so that when we can sit down after all of this and look at our plan and look at all this information that has been gathered by a few specific trustees and the superintendent, we will be able to make a better, stronger plan for the future. This is why I think a COVID-19 ad hoc committee would be beneficial to us.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Comments? Trustee Toon?
Thanks. No, I agree with trustee Poitras. I think this is a critical time. We've had the initial shock of all this going on. Our staff has done an amazing job at keeping us, the work moving forward for us, and making sure all our students and staff are safe and taken care for. And I think this really speaks to more of what our role as trustees when we get down into the governance aspects of this, and empowering a small group to do this with this ad hoc committee allows it to be more nimble, because it is going to be a pretty short amount of time, and I don't think it's realistic calling everyone together or necessarily cost effective. So I think in doing that with a smaller group, like the recommendation from Brownlee is a really advantageous at this time.
Great, thank you. Trustee Agus?
I was just wondering with this is that there is talk about setting up a committee for, what did you call that, for emergency preparedness committee. Would that not be perhaps a better committee to set up, and then they could add on and do things as various things come up around this? Because I could see in the future that this COVID-19 is going to come to an end, as is, an ad hoc committee. But I can see in the future also that we're going to have other things that are going to come up that we will need to talk about in terms of preparedness or things like that. So I was just wondering if maybe setting up this preparedness committee might be better than doing the ad hoc committee. I don't know, just an idea.
Trustee Poitras?
I really hear a lot of value in what you're saying, Trustee Yagos, and I personally would consider that a friendly amendment to create an emergency preparedness committee. If it was going to be a standing committee, that would then, in their terms of reference, need to say that they would be a committee that would meet in times of need, such as this. I would consider that a friendly amendment.
Trustee Long?
Perhaps called an emergency response committee, seeing as you took all my thunder.
Trustee Toon?
I'd be hesitant in doing that because I fully support having a standing committee permanently as emergency preparedness, but in the middle of an emergency, you don't necessarily just focus on that. There's a lot more information that's going to be coming, and if it's tailored as a COVID-19 committee, it's clear that that's what its purpose is in dealing with it. I don't want to have a special meeting in a week because something else COVID-19 related comes forward, and we've only struck a emergency preparedness committee, and the definition might not fit. So I think if we leave it as a COVID-19 committee with the focus of emergency preparedness, by this time in a month, we'll have another board meeting. The committee will already been struck. They'll have terms of reference brought back, and the whole board can have input on it to say this is what we should do. I'd be hesitant in changing it to a standing committee of the board without looking at it first and coming up with some terms of reference.
Trustee McKee?
I would just like to know at this time, is the senior administration, I'm almost certain, you must certainly have some sort of, or have been working on something similar to this. I would think that you probably have spent some time on this because you report back to us in a very factual way. Would this be a duplication of what the senior administration is currently doing?
Do you want a response from the mover of the motion? Or you just,
Like maybe Mr. Seguin or one of the other senior administrators could just inform me with what they are currently doing with regards to this.
Mr. Siegman? Pull it forward, maybe.
Flash. There we go. All right. Yes, the division does have a pandemic plan already. And I think it would be wise to revisit that for sure, given the circumstances that have happened, and just see if there's gaps in there, or if there are other things that might have changed over the years. The last time that was probably looked at or developed was back when SARS was around, possibly, and that sort of thing. I know that Mr. Feller, our associate superintendent, has been working with our occupational health and safety and a whole emergency kind of preparedness team to revisit from the senior management side what our response is to all kinds of situations. So there is something already in place. I guess, you know, when I was first looked at this, I thought, like Trustee Yagos did, that perhaps it was a broader committee that would look at the emergency response or emergency preparedness. I just find that if it's specific to COVID, by the time this committee gets developed in terms of reference are there in place, I hope we're on our way out of it. And I think an emergency preparedness or an emergency response committee that has the responsibility to take an overall look at what the division's plan is and how everybody's role is in that plan might be more beneficial. So when Trustee Yago spoke to that, that's kind of what resonated with me, is that something more enduring to stand the test of time, and whether it's a pandemic or whether it's another situation that affects the jurisdiction and the learning that is taking place within the jurisdiction might be better. One last comment is just that during this COVID situation, I've had a number of trustees respond back that they're very pleased with the amount of communication that they've got from senior management to be aware of what's happening, and then to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Without knowing the full details and the terms of reference of this committee, I just worry that if a few trustees are selected to sit on the committee and they're the ones that are getting the firsthand information, I don't know that that would sit well with the rest of the trustees, because I think in these times where there is something that is happening that is affecting the entire jurisdiction and every one of our communities and schools, that all of you want to know the information as quickly as you can. So I'll just leave it with that for thoughts.
Trustee Burdette first.
So, yeah, my comments were kind of along the lines of what Mr. Siegman just talked about. And I guess my other question would be, so an ad hoc committee has an end. Does it end when the COVID crisis is over, when the stops are off? Does it end 6 months later when we've evaluated how we did with COVID? I mean, yeah, that would be my question. When do we see it ending if it's an ad hoc committee? I think I would probably be in favor of a preparedness committee that's always there, that jumps in and looks after stuff like that and evaluates how we did. Crises, I think I agree with Mr. Sigmund when he says we have been very, very well informed. And when there's a crisis going on, we're in the crisis. And I think the committee's value is when we use that committee after the fact to evaluate how we did going through that crisis. And that's where I think probably like you say, a crisis response committee or something like that that's permanently standing would probably be of more value than an ad hoc committee at this time.
Thank you. Trustee Poitras?
I feel strongly that as trustees, our job is to not sit back and be well-informed. I feel like we need to be a part of the process, make sure that we're staying in our own sandbox, but being a part of the process. I too thought long and hard about how would I feel if we started an ad hoc COVID-19 committee and I was not sitting on it. I want to know what's going on. I want to have all the information. I want all the updates, which is why I looked into what exactly would this committee's purpose be. And the purpose is not to get the information first and to have more information than anyone else. Their job is to take the most accurate and up-to-date information and make sure that our policies currently align with that. So if there are things happening like moving our board meetings to be fully electronic, if there's something in our policy that currently states that we need to have the board chair here in person, and that's no longer something that is going to be happening or needs to be happening during this time, we can quickly change those policies and get them fixed so that we can do those things. The other piece that we spoke about was to look at the emergency preparedness plan. Do we have one? What does it look like? And what then do we need to change after we've gone through this? My response to Jim would be, if this was specifically a COVID-19, I would say when you've looked at the terms of reference that have been set out, once those things are accomplished, that's when it would be done. When all of the policies have been gone through, when everything is said and done with COVID-19, and we have looked at the entire plan, emergency preparedness plan, and said, we've done all we can do, we've reported back to the board, then it would be done. Unfortunately, I don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. Our hope is that we're peaking today and on our way down, but we don't know if an emergency response team or committee is what we decided to go with instead of a COVID-19 specific, then I would say the same thing. In any type of emergency, this committee would need to get together, make sure that anything is changing needs to align with our policies, and also keep track of what is going on so that we can look back and make sure that our preparedness is in line with what happened and how we can make improvements going forward. I hope that answered your questions.
Trustee Yeages?
First of all, an ad hoc committee does not need a term of reference. When you say an ad hoc committee, you give the beginning and the end of it, and then what they're going to do, specifically what they're going to do. And I think setting up an ad hoc committee at this point, and I do think that going through policy and seeing how it affects not only what's happening now, but what's going to happen in any emergency, that's a good thing. But that's a long term, because we cannot change policy. What happens is you have to bring it to a board meeting, and it has to be changed, and it has to be discussed. So that could take time. It's not going to happen right away. And in these times right now, we don't have time. When things happen, they happen. I think, and my other concern is, how is this committee going to maybe in a sense hinder what the administration is doing? Because I think we've been kept really up to date. I think we do what we can. A lot of times when you say you take action, what are you going to do? I think we do what we can with it, but we don't want to get involved in something that's going to hinder what the message is being sent out by the central administration and that. I sometimes I do know we feel like we're just sort of sitting there and not really doing anything, but I think by just being supportive and working with the administration is a good deal. And I'm just going to point out that thing what Lori said, and I totally agree with it at the beginning of it when she said, and I know this was said before, when there is a crisis, the superintendent doesn't have time to listen to every one of us. There's only should be one person, and I agree with that, because we don't want to take away his time talking to the board when he could be or should be working with the crises.
Trustee Long?
Was it Trustee Toon that made the motion?
Trustee Poitras?
Trustee Poitras. I wonder if you'd consider a friendly amendment. Superintendent Seguin mentioned that all trustees would like to be aware of everything that's happening. at a certain time, more than just making the policy. So I wondered if perhaps this could be reworded to consisting of the chair, superintendent, or designate, and one trustee from each zone. And then everybody, each zone would be represented and informed.
Yeah, trustee Toon? It's on. Now it shut off.
Hello?
There you go.
There we go. Difficulties with that is then you have quorum of the board if you have the chair and somebody from each ward. So I would be against the proposition that's put forward by trustee Long to include those. Reality is we're all here to represent our area, and as committees, they don't make any final decision. They consult with the board and bring information back. So there is a chance for all of us to be involved with this. Similar to trustee Poitras, I would love to be involved, but if I'm not, I fully support the work going forward, and it's important that we all do that. This is something huge, and we do this with our branding. It's not feasible for us all to sit and talk and bring in all the information. Information was whittled down and brought forward to the board. Input was seek, and then it will come back to the board for approval. I think we can't just look in the rear view mirror during this event. This just can't be let's dissect it afterwards and see what gaps there need to be. This is a long-lasting event that is far-reaching, and I think it's a mistake if we sit back and say there isn't a role for trustees to play in this, because this is the biggest thing that's happened in the province in my lifetime, and I know that stakeholders really appreciate the support that the board has given and the support our administration has given. This doesn't mean that we step out of our sandbox at all. And I think this helps them in their role working with us, because I can list 3 committees that the responsibility of this would do. When you're looking at policy, when you're looking at advocacy, when you're looking at pulling together 3 committees, that's 3 times the amount of meetings that you're going to be meeting with our superintendent or their designate. Let's streamline things, let's be efficient, and let's help our administration while we govern as leaders.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor, and there's been a friendly amendment. So I think at this point, everyone's had a say in it. I just need to know if we're going to accept that still as a friendly amendment, or if we need to vote on it.
Just as a mover, I would not move that as a friend. I would not accept it as a friendly amendment.
So, because we've had 2 friendly amendments.
Well,
Trustee Toon?
oh,
Yeah, we should have addressed the first one.
We should address them and separately and then move
So
back
the
to
first friendly
original.
amendment was to change it from an ad hoc COVID-19 committee to an emergency response.
I think you'd move it the opposite way, because it would be treated as an amendment to the amendment, so you'd go in reverse
Okay.
order. So the last one would be dealt with first.
And so trustee Long's friendly amendment was not accepted by trustee Poitras as a friendly amendment. And so do you still want to make that amendment in a motion?
I withdraw it.
You withdraw it? Okay, thank you. So the friendly amendment on the floor then right now is that instead of the COVID-19 ad hoc committee, we have a friendly amendment of an emergency response. Was that correct? Trustee Yegus, we're just speaking to the amendment right now, the friendly amendment.
just before you go, I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, okay, trustee Yegus?
Okay, just in talking to this, I do have a problem with trying to think of the things that an ad hoc committee of the COVID-19, exactly what they would be doing. If we do an emergency preparedness, they would have a term of reference. They would be very definite about what their role is. And as I said, there's things that, a lot of things that you could be including in there. Whereas just one specific committee under that, I don't know what they would do, okay?
Any other questions? So I just have a clarifying question then. So your friendly amendment was to change the COVID-19 ad hoc committee to an emergency Response Committee? Standing Committee? Okay, so we're going to be voting on replacing an ad hoc committee, the COVID-19, with an emergency response committee of the board. Yeah, you can close.
Okay,
Trustee
so
Yeagas.
just
Or,
before you
sorry,
vote, I just want to remind everyone that an emergency response committee would not, their job would not be to get the information first or relay the information to the people in their ward, which is why I didn't consider that a friendly amendment. Our superintendent gets in touch with our board chair and gets the information out to us. Their job is specifically to take the most accurate and up-to-date information and make sure that it is in line with our emergency preparedness plan that we currently have, and if it's not, then what we need to do to make that happen, and to be constantly reviewing the policy with whatever current emergency is happening, make sure that they're reviewing the policy and that it all does not go against what is currently in practice during that time.
Okay. We're going to vote. All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Trustee Toon? Move it forward.
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect. Can we pick the members of that committee?
Sure. Okay, so right now we have the committee consisting of the chair, the superintendent, and 2 trustees commencing immediately. Everyone who wants to be on the committee, please raise your hands. So we have Trustee Toon, Trustee Yeagas, and Trustee Poitras. At this time, we'll each be given a chance to speak to it, and then we will vote. Do you want to start, Trustee Poitras? Yeah, sorry, Trustee Toon.
Just a clarifying question. My understanding was we'd allow others to speak that weren't running for the position to ask questions or make a statement or be part of the discussion as previously discussed in voting terms.
Yeah, I just thought we'd let everybody have a chance to speak as to why they want to be it, then everybody can ask some clarifying questions. So do you want to start, Trustee Poitras?
I have a fairly open schedule and I'm close to head office, not that we can't video in, but I have the ability to make myself available anytime that we may be in emergency and be able to do that. I also am happy to look over policy and be involved in rewriting those things, so I would be happy to be a part of this committee.
Thank you. Trustee Yeagas? Well, I went to this way. Doesn't have to.
I know the policy, and I've been involved with it for quite a long time. I also have a lot of experience in this area in terms of backgrounds and everything else as a teacher and an administrator. I feel that this would be an area that I could really help with and everything. That's basically it.
Thank you. Trustee Toon?
Hello?
Yep, you're good.
There we go. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity again. Been involved with policy for a long time. As far as emergency preparedness goes, I have some experience in that. In the last week, even with what I'm involved with ASBA, provincially spoke with 9 board chairs in the area, finding out what their emergency preparedness was and what their response with COVID-19 was. So as it continues forward, I think having those contacts and being involved with the provincial side of things will help bring information that could be beneficial to the committee.
Okay, great, thanks. Trustee Poitras?
I agree that Clara has a lot of policy and I do not have much with emergency preparedness. So hearing both of them speak, I would be happy to withdraw my name as I think they're both better suited.
Okay. So Trustee Yeagas and Trustee Toon will be on our committee. I guess we don't need to ask any clarifying questions. Trustee Egas?
I think, and I really hate to do this to Daryl, especially because I know he is really, really busy, but I think we should be meeting quite soon to get up a term of reference because uh, we need to get, this, everything is happening so fast, we better get going.
Okay. Trustee Long?
And I think Trustee Poitras should be commended for stepping down and considering the other two for the position, thinking that perhaps they were more experienced.
Thank you. Trustee McKee?
I would certainly like to follow up on that same sort of the thought process. You were putting me between a rock and a hard place, trying to pick two out of those three. So I thank you for making that decision for me, Lacey.
Thank you. Once the committee meets, then they'll come up with a chair and then it'll be brought back to the board as to chair of the committee, or is that something you guys want to decide today? Okay, we'll meet for the few minutes after. Apparently Brad's going to be chair. Thank you, everyone. That was a great discussion. I feel like that's going to hugely benefit as trustees moving forward. All right, moving on to E4, professional learning. There was no, as we have previously stated, we've frozen all our PD funds for the remainder of the school year. So there'll be no need for approval on professional learning moving forward for the rest of the school year. Now moving, Trustee
In
Vegas?
terms of the professional learning, there are a lot of webinars that are coming out, and I'm going to start sending them to everybody just so that they could be aware of them, because some of them are interesting, some of them aren't, but I think they're coming from all sorts of areas, and then you could, if anybody is interested, they could just go on there. Most of them are free.
Thank you, that'd be great. All right, moving on to E5, the emergent item recommendation. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Trustees move that all board meetings will be held electronically until further notice. Can I get someone to make that motion? Trustee Toon? Any questions or comments? Trustee Burdette?
Yes, I support that. I believe that we do good work face to face, but in the era that we're in, I believe that that is a wise decision that we move to electronic for the rest of the year.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Trustee Toon?
I echo Trustee Burdette. I think this is the best thing for us to do currently under the current situation, and want to thank our staff for all that they've done, keeping us up to date and all our staff and ourselves safe during this time.
Thank you. Trustee Long?
Trustee Toon just made me think of something that should be said publicly, and that's to our three superintendents here, especially Superintendent Seguin, who keeps us up to date, it seems like every hour, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. All right, moving on to discussion items. F1, Superintendent Report. Oh, Trustee Long?
Could we have a 5-minute break?
Sure. At this moment, we will now take a 5-minute break. Thank you. See ya. Shouldn't have talked so much. Are you ready, Nikki? All right, going to call us back to order at 2:09. Moving on now to our discussion items, we'll have our superintendent report. Mr. Seguin?
Great, thank you. I was trying to think back. It seems like it's been a long time since we last met, and I guess a lot of things has happened, although it's been probably the same amount of time in between board meetings as it has in the past. But of course, the thing that has occupied the most time this last month has certainly been COVID-19, right? And around the pandemic planning pieces. Thinking back, I believe it was about 3 days after our last board meeting when the announcement was for classes to be canceled. And ever since then, it's been a very, very busy pace. We have had all facets of our school jurisdiction, every staff member, our communities, just parents, kids, everybody has come together to allow the education continuity plan to go forward. And so that we can ensure that kids are still learning and still progressing in their academics. And I'm just very proud and need to publicly thank everybody in all of our stakeholders in our school community for coming together at this time to make it the best that it can be under the circumstances. Of course, we would want, ideally, to be able to have our kids in the buildings and interacting with their teachers and carrying on. We believe that's a really great model for education. Due to the pandemic that's out there, we have a limited ability to gather and all these other restrictions. And so just need everybody to know that we are working really hard to make the best of the situation as it is. Yesterday, we were able to announce that we were able to limit layoffs to our bus drivers and a few support staff members. And the responses from our support staff and from many teachers as well has been one of sincere gratitude. I just need to know, the board to know, that I appreciate your leadership in last week's decision to redirect board and system funds that were set aside for professional development, travel, subsistence, all those sorts of things to help contribute to savings that our finance department were able to find in the substitute teacher costs. That was a big cost savings there. We weren't going to be accessing substitute teachers under this new model, and so those dollars were able to be freed up along with board and system admin. We were able to free up the transportation services dollars that we would normally have expended on fuel, maintenance for our buses, and then unfortunately the bus driver salaries. But this new at-home learning period didn't require that service. And so we were able to take those funds and transfer them to meet the 14% reduction from the government in base funding and 51% in our transportation. And I guess one other place that I really need to help everybody understand as well is that as our finance team was looking at all of the options that were out there, they had communications with our school-based administrators as well. And many of the school-based administrators were able to redirect and free up funds that had been set aside for one purpose to this new important purpose as well, in trying to be able to retain as many staff as we could for as long as possible. So just very proud of our the board's work there and the leadership shown. The senior management have been working tirelessly, our finance department, communications, everybody, right out to our school-based personnel. We, as part of the planning, we decided to increase communications, felt that that was important. Things were changing, it seemed like hour by hour for a while. And so many days in a row, probably about 2 weeks worth, we met daily with our administrators. We did a Google Meet, and we were able to answer questions, give them updates, and keep them informed. And then they, in turn, would go back to their staff and have a staff meeting as well, and to keep staff in the loop of the things that were happening. Sometimes our answers were simply, we don't know, and let's be patient and let's try to wait. Or sometimes our answers were, this is the information we have now. By tomorrow, that may change. And so let's just continue to meet. And it was well received by our administrators. We increased, like I said, the amount of communications with trustees and keeping everybody in the loop there, but also with our parents and with the staff in our division as well to try and keep them abreast of the constantly evolving changes that were occurring. Anyway, I'll leave that pandemic planning. We could talk for days about what happened, and I think the opportunity to discuss some of these things in more detail with the new Emergency Preparedness Committee will be valuable for sure. I guess just recapping the other things that happened in the last month. Certainly, you noticed today from the Policy Committee all of the work that has been done on the policies 3, 9, and 13 in particular. And those were big changes, but they were important changes as we move forward. And I think we're certainly in better shape and more alignment with the new Superintendent Leadership Quality Standard and the Audit Committee as part of the Education Act, and the role of the board correspondingly changing as well. So grateful for the opportunity to work with that board policy committee in making those changes. One of the things also that I don't want to get lost in the highlights from last month around the pandemic planning was that we were able to secure 2 new administrator teams. So we've moved Roger Doucette and Joel Gamache from JT Foster from acting roles into permanent positions. And so they will be the new administration going forward there. And then we were able to replace Chad Jensen and Mary Krzan as principal and assistant principal at Livingston School with Sarah Holmgren and Eliza Gross. And we're looking forward to working with them in their new roles as well. The last thing that I'll highlight, I guess, is from my work last month was I had been scheduled to write the Eye on Education article for the Lethbridge Herald the Wednesday following the announcement that there were school closures. And I had a draft all prepared, and then Saturday when it was announced that schools would be closed, I had to go back and rework that to get that out on time to be in the Herald, and it's attached on the back of my report there as well for you. I guess I'll just close by saying, you know, in the future month here coming up, because these things still need to occur, we will be having lots of staffing conversations with school-based administrators. They will be getting their budgets, school-based budgets soon, and so we'll be talking with them about different staff requests for transfers or those that might be heading on to maternity leave next year, and how we go about replacing those staff members and meeting some of the transfer requests that we can. I also have, I think between the 2 new associates this year and the school-based administrators that were up for their evaluations, their term evaluations, I think there's 8 or 10 that I'm responsible for, and so I will try and get that done in this next month. And then, of course, that big job of the admin procedures, updating those with the Education Act is ongoing, and we're getting closer, and that work will continue over the next month, and then trying to fit in there some time to be off a little bit for an Easter break as well. So that's a quick recap. Are there any questions or comments?
Anything? I also want to echo your response and saying how much work everybody has done through this whole pandemic, and the pulling away the 14% from us. I know that all of our central office has worked long hours, and I appreciate all the hard work and the great continuing education plan that we have put out there for Livingston Range School Division. I have heard so much good feedback from parents that I know they appreciate all the hard work that also went into developing that plan and supporting teachers and parents through this whole thing. So thank you to all of central office and to all the administration and teachers out there. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Trustee Long?
The foresight that all of you at central office, and Jeff included, showed last year by already beginning to make cuts looks even more important now. We wouldn't be in this position. That's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Seguin. on to F2, but in light of everything that Mr. Sequin has said and the reduction in our budget, F2 is actually kind of out of date now. So we will just be updated at our next fiscal monitoring report into May. May. We're in April. So we'll have our current update in April. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Mr. Perry? Okay, great, thanks. So, we always have one at every board meeting, so this one's out of date because of all the reductions. So we'll just have our current one in our May meeting. May. Thanks, everyone. All right, on to F3, our budget stakeholder summary. Mr. Seguin.
All right, I'm going to ask Nikki to pull up the,
There it is.
the presentation that's been prepared for you. I'll just take you through the information, and I guess it was back in that March board meeting as well that the board asked me to find a way to quickly be able to get stakeholder involvement in our budgeting process and priorities as we move forward. So worked with Carly, and we were able to put together a stakeholder engagement survey. Unfortunately, the school closures happened very soon after the survey was live. So we put the survey out from March 12th to the 22nd, I think it was. And it was, I think, March 15th that school closed. So we weren't able to get as many student responses as we thought we would. But nonetheless, we're still very happy that we had almost 400 responses to the survey. And I'll take you through the slides, and we can show you how it broke down towards the different representative groups that are identified there. So students, parents, grandparents, guardian, school-based staff, division office staff, and community members. So we'll go to the next one. So just providing a little bit of background again to refresh everybody's memory. With the funding reductions, the budget impact on Livingston Range School Division means that our funding as a jurisdiction will decrease by about 2.2 million from our operating budget over the next 3 years. And so that's caused us to revisit every single piece of operations in our school division. And as part of that process, the trustees sought engagement from their stakeholders. So we developed this survey, as I mentioned, from March 12th to 22nd. It was open to parents, students, staff, and community members. Here's how our communities responded. So the Crow's Nest Pass had 104 respondents, followed by Fort Macleod and then Claresholm, and the rest are on there. So you can quickly see where the responses of these 399 responses, where they came from. Okay. So our first survey question, in your opinion, what are the most important areas to consider as we work on our budget and develop our 3-year education plan? Came through that these 4 areas were things that came to people's mind in that first question. So supporting our students, and there lists several ways there. Different aspects of the curriculum and programming were seen as important. They expressed a desire to reduce administrative costs, and if anything could be done in that area. And then the last area that would probably summarize their comments in that survey question number 1 was around infrastructure, and you'll see this come out a little bit later on, but the comments around updating and modernizing J.T. Foster came through loud and clear, I believe, from the Nanton parents for sure. Okay. All right, second question. What's one thing we could prioritize that would have the greatest impact on you as a student, a parent, staff, or community member? So class size and support staff, those were the 2 areas by far that had the most comments or the most input provided in those areas. And then you can see also, staying consistent with the last slide, that area around curriculum and programming. There's actually a couple different types of programming in there. And then, of course, the modernization of J.T. Foster. Survey question 3. What are some new and innovative ideas the board can think about to maximize resource allocation? So stakeholders brought forth ideas around seeking fundraising or community donations, looking at potentially a 4-day week. Would that provide savings in terms of electricity, busing costs, custodial staff, whatever the savings might be in that area? Another idea that came forward was around community involvement. Could community members be involved and more engaged in the school, some partnerships? And then taking a look at our technology and how we can use technology and leverage that to meet student needs around programming options that are available to them. And then there was a call in question 3 there to focus back on the core subjects and get rid of non-essential items. So those are some of the comments that were made on question 3. Survey question 4, this asked them to take a look at the long list. I think there were about 13 things on that list and different groupings, and said to them, can you identify to us what's most important to you? If you could only pick 5, what are the most important 5 areas? So community members responded and said classroom supports, small class sizes, academics, mental health, high quality teaching, and then there were a couple other areas there, but those were the top 5. Moving on to parent, grandparent, and guardian responses, academics, classroom supports, small class sizes, high quality teaching, and great school culture were the top 5 that were identified by parents, grandparents, and guardians. School-based staff responses included small class sizes, classroom supports, mental health support, great school culture, and then tied for 5th was the high quality teaching and the focus on academics. The last area, we have a limited number of students, but the students that did participate identified similar things. So small class size, the classroom supports, academics. They emphasized more than the other groups, perhaps more around the options and the programming that's available. And then again, the mental health supports as well, and high quality teaching was the same as the mental health support in that category. I think that's a quick summary. You have this, was shared with you, so hopefully you had a chance to look at it in greater detail, but I just present those findings to you and open it up now for any comments or conversation.
Trustee McKee?
All I can say is that, like, I'm very proud of this board and also with the senior administration. And for back in '83, the first thing that the cuts came through to the education, and one of the first things that got reduced in pay were the educational assistants. And I'm very proud to say that now, you know, the people who are involved with education directly have realized the importance of course, of all the staffing involved in education. And the board has realized that the educational assistants need to keep them in place was very important. So I was very disappointed, 30 some years ago on that decision, but I can say that now I'm very proud of the school system, the people who are involved with this, and you can see from the responses that the classroom support is either the top one or the second one on the priority. So I'm very proud of what has been achieved in respect of these unprecedented times, and that the people here have stepped up and seen the importance to the staffing for the whole school division. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No. I would like to say thank you to everyone who took the time out to take our survey And we will use this information not only now, but into the future when we're looking at making decisions for our budget and for Livingston Range. So thank you. Thank you, Daryl. Now we're on to F4, Superintendent Reappointment. I received a letter from our Minister of Education, Adriana LaGrange. Your request for approval for the reappointment of Daryl Seguin as Superintendent of Schools for the Livingston Range School Division was forwarded to my office by the Register. I hereby approve the reappointment of Mr. Seguin as Superintendent of Schools for the Livingston Range School Division for a 5-year term effective July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2025. So we just would like to thank Mr. Seguin and appreciate having him with us for the next 5 years for sure. Yep. Anybody have any questions or comments? No? All right. We just need to just take a few minutes here just so that, I know, do we have like, oh no. We just need to set up our presentation for our next presenter who will be down here shortly. And so we just need to take a few minutes. Whoa. Lisa, oh, there she is. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, how are you?
Great, thanks.
Good.
Go ahead and start whenever you feel like you'd like to. I'd like to introduce Lisa Furukawa. She's joining us via Google Hangout. Yep, so thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me time today to share. This is my first presentation via virtual. So between Nikki and I'm hoping we can get everyone's question answered. And there's a slight lag sometimes, so please feel free, Nikki, to interrupt more than once if you need to, and then I will stop talking. I do see my presentation up in the back. So today, what I'd like to do is celebrate early learning across Livingston Range School Division. I'd like to talk a little bit about our division-wide professional growth that we've had in our division, discuss how it transfers into our classroom to improve student learning, discuss community relationships and inclusive practices, as well as growth that we've had over the year and coming changes and our plans for the changes. How is the volume? Am I yelling or am I good?
It's perfect.
Okay, I'll go to the next slide, Nikki. And as you know, we focused on Hanen training for the last 4 to 5 years. And we've been offering a number of these programs to our educational assistants, our teaching staff, our community partners, and our daycares, day homes, and private preschools. So it's kind of a multi-layered. So the first ones that we did were encouraging language, and that was an introductory level, which is supporting staff with understanding child development, language development. And then we moved into let language lead the way to literacy. So that is understanding language development and how the strength of a child's expressive, receptive language then leads to success in literacy. And that's why we have such a strong focus on language, communication, and relationships. This year we added a third training. It's called ABC and Beyond. It is an advanced training and a 3-day series with the entire focus on taking language and literacy and then teaching educators how to promote this within the classrooms to help support our children to read and write. And this is a 3-day series with lots of videotaping for video feedback. And we also had approximately 6 members of the community join us from private daycares and private preschools as well. And so I guess one of our philosophies is the more that our parents know, the more that our educators know, the greater the impact is on children. So we grow teachers and we grow staff in order to grow our children. We also have the I'm Ready component, which is a parent training, and this supports parents with language and literacy. And I'm pretty thrilled about these programs being in place, especially now with a lot of our educational programming occurring virtually and online. So we definitely have grown parents and staff to help support this. Go to the next slide. So you might be wondering, how does that transfer into the classroom? Well, if you take a look at the picture here, this is in our Canyon Preschool. All of the staff attended the ABC Hannon and Beyond. It is a Reggio-inspired preschool, so they always did have provocations and literacy embedded within their centers. But after attending the training, they purposely added more books, writing tools, clipboards, papers at every center. So if you take a look at this picture here, you see one boy who's reading a story to the little bears and babies and animals in the bed. Another boy has a clipboard. He came in and he started counting how many babies were in the crib, and he started talking about how there wasn't enough room and overcrowding. I'm not quite sure if he was imitating a licensing officer or a teacher, but that was the role he took on. The other little boy was soothing and singing a song. And then the boy in the background decided he was going to be the one to decide how many more beds do we need? Well, this boy is too big for the bed, so this person needs to move out of a crib into a real bed. Now we need playpens. So a lot of it is learning through play, which we've talked about lots. But when you think about the learning through play, what are these guys demonstrating? Literacy, numeracy, counting the beds, the babies, what they needed to build. They had to collaboratively work together. They had to problem solve where to go in the future. And then from there, they took the information and they went to their preschool educator or the educational assistant, I don't recall which, and said, hey, we need this many new beds in here. We need larger playpens because it's not suiting our needs. So they were able to take their learning, all the information that they gathered, and then transfer. So this is just one example of how the professional development that we provide to our staff is transferring into classrooms. I'll go to the next slide, Nikki. I'm not sure if people have heard of Dr. Gibb or Building Brains and Futures, their executive functioning. I'm looking around. I'll give you a little backstory just in case. Dr. Gibb is a professor of neuroscience at the University of Lethbridge, and she's been heavily involved in a project called Building Brains and Futures, which was founded by the Alberta government a number of years ago. And the reason this project was started is the government had noted that children in Alberta, and specifically the Lethbridge area, were coming to school with certain skills that would be lagging behind school readiness compared to some other locations within Canada. So through research and through partnerships with other organizations, they created something called executive functioning curriculum. I'll give you a little bit of info on executive functioning. We all use this every single day. It helps us bring focus. It helps us take information in, sort through the information that we need, revise plans, manage stress, delay our rewards. So all of these skills together are called executive functioning. And they don't just happen naturally for some children, for many children actually. We need to help build these in the early years. You may have heard this called air traffic control. And I think all of us can think of some adults that may have difficulty still with executive functioning, with attention or with delaying reward, possibly with social skills. So actually these skills support us throughout our entire lifetime. So because we know this through the research, Dr. Gibb and her team created something called executive functioning curriculum. And to just an eye who's unaware of what is actually happening, they look like cute little games. But if these games are purposely applied at a regular basis, look at the games, red light, green light. What's a child learning there that's an executive functioning? Working memory, they have to stop and think before they act. They have to have emotional control. They have to control their body movements. They have to follow instructions. And throughout the games, it supports paying attention, flexible thinking, teamwork. evaluating the rewards, learning how to wait for it, problem solving, and modeling. So many of our kindergartens and preschools are already practicing the Dr. Gibbs executive functioning curriculum. I'll get you to go to the next slide, Nikki. And we've talked about it in the office quite often. So this year when Sandra and I were thinking about, okay, so what are we going to do this year to promote community engagement, to promote inclusive practices and engage our communities as well as our other school divisions. So we started talking about the executive brain function. So then our early childhood coalition within Fort Macleod, what she said she would do, because she's aware of the executive functioning curriculum, she said, well, I'll go out and I'll meet with the day home providers and preschool people within Fort Macleod. So she originally brought the games and talked about executive functioning and the importance of it. Also over at Kids First, they were having family sessions about executive functioning and the importance for lifelong health, social skills, school success. So Sandra and I reached out to elders, to Blackfoot language experts, to other school divisions, and we gathered together and we looked at, okay, how can we adapt these games, with Dr. Gibbs' permission, of course. So we come up with that we'd add Blackfoot stories, we'd add multicultural toys, dolls, animals, drums, and books. We have Blackfoot language involved, we have music. Within the shared projects, we now have traditional values built in. As many of you who know me, you'll often hear me say, just like me, or that's kind of like me. Because if we want people really invested and interested, they need to see themselves in the activities, in the learning, and within the games. And when we went and talked with the day home providers, we talked about inclusion means inclusion is for everybody, not just one group. So if you have children in your day home that possibly speak a different language or have a different culture, let's make sure we make adaptations as well so they see themselves within these games. And the research does show that these games purposely practiced on a regular basis does help to grow executive functioning, which then leads to increased likelihood of school success. Go to the next slide, Nikki. In our kindergarten collaborative, we meet a few times each year. These were the areas where we focused this year. Conceptual understanding is probably something you've been hearing quite a bit about in the media and throughout education. All of our kindergarten teachers had the opportunity to attend professional development on conceptual understanding. And I'll give you kind of a short version of what that is when it relates to our young learners. So kids naturally learn through curiosity and understanding a concept. So we need children to have that base understanding or foundational understanding, and then to start making connections between that concept and another. We don't tell them what it is. What we want them to do is uncover it through guiding questions. For example, what is the relationship between blank and blank, or how does this impact that? So we want them to develop relationships and have a deeper understanding so that they can have some learning transfer. We also focused on literacy. Dr. Bright from the University of Lethbridge, she was going to provide a session on young writers for preschool, kindergarten, and grade 1. Unfortunately, that has been put on hold until probably next year. We also focused on inclusive practices. Once again, the just like me, sort of like me. We talked about every single child needs to know that the environment was set up for them and that you purposely planned. I'm going to really simplify this for a moment. We talked about how if you invite somebody over for dinner and they arrive at the door and everyone's sitting down eating, but there was no plate set for them, do they feel invited? If you invited somebody over for dinner and there's a plate set for them, you welcome them to your room and you say, oh, and I remembered that you really like roast beef, so I made roast beef for you, or you could have this choice. And I know that's a very simplistic view, but when we're thinking about inclusion, we need to plan the environment in the classroom to make sure our children know that they're invited. And then you offer choices based on what you know of them and their interest, so they're able to access the curriculum and continue to develop and access the grade level outcomes. We focused on documenting of student learning. most or all of our kindergarten classrooms are currently using digital documentation. Many of them are using something called Seesaw or FreshGrade. So parents are able to access online, see video clips of their children learning, audio recordings of them reading and participating, as well as they're able to respond to the teacher and share information back. And because the kindergarten teachers were already doing this, when we did have to move towards a virtual platform, it actually made it quite a bit easier for those families and for those teachers to move over to a virtual platform. Go to the next slide, Nikki. And so, okay, sorry, just a sec. Okay, so this slide here is just demonstrating the number of children that we have supported either through program unit funding and mild to moderate funding over the last number of years. As you see, we've had a steady growth of children that we've supported. And I'd like to highlight one of the benefits of this. As you may know, the new interim funding manual is now going to provide funding based on a profile. So they're using 3 years of profile. So if you see the last 2 years are 80, 88, and then our projected this year's funding. So we've sort of leveled out. So that's good news for us that we're being funded based on a profile that's probably similar to what will be this year. I'll go to the next slide, Nikki. And then within Livingston Range School Division, children being supported either through program unit funding or mild to moderate funding, you see majority of those children are within the communities of Horace Allen, West Meadow, and WA Day. And yes, they are our larger schools. And I'll go to the next slide, Nikki. Within our program unit funding, and this is similar to last year and actually similar to across the entire province, 90% of our children are accessing program unit funding based on a severe communication delay. And then there's a small number based on a multiple, which would be something like Down syndrome, or medical, which may be autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, or a significant medical need. One thing to think about is communication. Because there's 90% being funded in that area, there are changes coming in the new funding manual, so that will have an impact on us next year. I'll get you to go to the next slide, Nikki. So that moves into what changes are we anticipating for program unit funding starting in the fall. The number of years has changed. In the past, children were able to access funding for 3 years, so ages 3, 4, and 5. Now we have program unit funding for children aged 3 and 4. Kindergarten children will be supported within the K-12 specialized learning grant. There is an age maximum. Now, because it's an interim manual, we're hoping we might be able to get the Era of Alberta Education to maybe consider changing this age maximum. The new age maximum is less than 4 years, 8 months as of September 1. So what that means is those children with late birthdays, parents in the past sometimes decided to keep their child back and not send them. If this date maintains, then this will mean parents will need to send their children to get the 2 years of program unit funding, or it could potentially mean they miss out on a year. We're hoping that maybe that was just misunderstood, and we might be able to explain that. A number of us school divisions are talking together. So kindergarten is K-12. The coding criteria change. This is where I was talking about the communication. So in the past, students were able to access program unit funding if they had a moderate language delay as well as a moderate fine motor or gross motor. That section is no longer there. So that might have been a handful of children in our division, but starting in September, those children would no longer qualify for program unit funding. There's also stricter criteria for assessments. Now for language, you have to be below the first or below the second percentile, depending on the assessment. In the past, a child that hovered around that second, third percentile with an impact statement clearly demonstrating the impact on the learning environment, we were able to qualify them. We will no longer be able to qualify them. They must be below the second or first percentile as well as impact. Also within communication, in the past, a child with a severe speech sound delay would qualify if they had moderate expressive or moderate receptive language delay. Now they must have a moderate total language delay. So that would be another handful of children that would not qualify for support. I guess on the positive note though, because we spent so many years with professional development, training our staff in Hannon, language development and literacy, our staff is well equipped to continue to support these children as well. Go to the next slide, Nikki. So within the kindergarten and early learning, as well as all the grades, our purpose for assessment is to drive programming. So we want to know where children are at so we can plan their programming for them. In the past, we had 2 schools that were using direct assessment in the spring, and they would see all of their up and coming kindergarten children and families in May or June. So when they came in the fall, they already knew what level they were at, and they would be prepared to be moving forward. This year, we're planning to do that across the division. Right now, that is on a tentative hold. However, the Learning Bar, who is the creator of the early years evaluation, is looking at possibilities for virtual connection with families. Early years teacher assessment, that is the assessment that is done in the fall, once again to drive programming, and everyone is using that. Typically in April and May, we're doing what we call our developmental check-ins. So we're using ages and stages for our 2 to 4-year-old children, and then the EYEDA for our 4-year-olds going into kindergarten. Right now, our check-ins are on hold till we figure out a way to either do it virtually, or hopefully in August, we may be able to have these check-ins. And we need these assessments in order to qualify kids for program unit funding or mild to moderate. One of our speech pathologists has agreed that we could contract her for the month of August, if need be, to do assessments, since we won't be doing it in the spring. We also have both of our speech pathologists connecting with AXLPA, which is their governing body, to see what assessments are we able to do virtually and what that might look like to make sure that we're not missing out on any of our children. Go to the next slide, Nikki. As I think all of you probably know, we've been in a collaborative development with the town of Pincher Creek over the last couple years, and a new building is going up on the site of Canyon. It looks fantastic. It's continuing to be built, and they think the space should be ready by June. Of course, now our children won't be moving in, but we will have the space ready and potentially could be moving in some of our supplies and materials. With this new space, we'll be able to provide spaces for infants and toddlers, where right now at Canyon, we're only able to provide childcare for children ages 3 to 5. We are in the 3rd and final year of our early learning childcare grant, also known as the $25 a day grant. And that will go until March of 2021. And with that, we're able to provide professional development for the expansion within the new building. You may also have heard that we are possibly being reopened at the Canyon Childcare site to provide childcare for essential service workers. That application has gone to the Minister of Children's Services. So that is a potential that we'll be able to continue to support the community in Pincher Creek. We'll go to the next slide. So programming during school closures. So teachers have been connecting with parents and families. They've been virtually or through Seesaw, our first grade, been providing personal readings of stories, singing songs. Our therapists, like speech language pathologists and occupational therapists, they have been using telehealth so they can virtually continue to provide services for families. And we've been listening very carefully to what our parents are saying. Some parents are like, give me more. Some parents are like, whoa, slow down. So it's not a one fits all. What we're providing and sharing is based on the family's need as well as the child's need. We've challenged all of our educators and our staff to provide options for families to go outside and participate in these activities. For years, we've been saying, don't have children on screens. Little children should have limited amount of screen time. And now suddenly we're providing everything virtual. So we're really trying to make sure that we can share the information that they're able to go outside and then to play. And then the last slide, Nikki. That is the end of my information sharing. If there's any wonderings about, comments, or questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
You talked about doing the assessments and you're hoping that maybe you can get them done in August since we are trying to do it virtually. When do you have to have the assessments done by so that the kids can get qualified for funding?
Well, in a normal year, September 30th. However, there has been some discussion about moving that date based on the school closures.
That was
So
my
we may
next
go
question, yeah.
December 1st.
So that they're willing to move that date because of everything that happened.
Yes, that's
Okay.
the discussion that happened, that it
Great.
could be December 1st. But in case it's not, we'll definitely have somebody available August 1st.
Okay, that is going to be a hard push, but yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Lisa? Yeah, Trustee McKee?
If you look at your slide from the ages 3 to 5 supported PUF, mild and moderate, you've had quite an increase in the number of students. It's, well, it's more than doubled over the last 5 years. Could you explain why that is happening? I mean, I can speculate on the, maybe you're doing such a wonderful job that you are picking up on more students who need that support, but is there any other reason for that increase?
I would say it's multiple reasons. I personally feel that children have always been out there. We have just done a better job at getting into communities, talking with healthcare workers, daycare workers, preschools. We've been exceptionally flexible with meeting the needs of families and children. And I think over the years, we've gradually built their trust to understand that a child who is being funded through program unit funding is a benefit. It just increases their probability of being successful in schools. I don't have any data that indicates that there's more need out there. From what I see and from what I think, it's everyone working together to support children and build trust. And word of mouth travels very quickly in small communities. One mom tells another mom, tells another mom, one dad talks to another dad, talks to another dad, and then they realize that this support is there to help their children. So I think it's been a collaborative effort across the communities.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Lisa, for taking your time out to share this with us. It's really great to hear what's happening in our school division.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Great. Moving on to our key messages. Do you need a few minutes, Nikki? Or oh, we're good. I think that the letter from the ministry with approving Daryl's 5-year contract is a good key message. Yes, it is. What else would anybody else like to see as our key messages? I shouldn't say 3, I should just say key.
The new committee that we formed.
The Emergency Response Committee? Can you please turn on your mic, Mr. Burdett?
Could.
Thank you.
We should talk about how with the funding cuts, our layoffs, and how that all worked out to what we figure is good, rather than what it could have been.
So just the update that came from
Yeah.
Mr. Seguin?
Yeah,
Yeah, so do you want the superintendent report in there or just that?
maybe
Yeah?
that would cover all of it, right?
That's what I was gonna recommend, is let's put the superintendent report, because there's
Yeah.
so much going on and it just encompasses so much. I think it's great.
Okay. So just a recap, right now we have the contract, that approval, the new committee, the Emergency Response Committee, and the superintendent report just covering all the budget changes. Trustee Poitras?
Mr. Seguin, where will the budget stakeholder summary be? Where will stakeholders have access to that? Where will it be posted?
Yeah, we haven't worked out those details yet, but I imagine Carly will want to speak with the board again, maybe at an upcoming meeting of the whole, and say, how is it that you want me to, like, do you want this publicly posted? Do you want the summary and some of the, you said this, we did this, so we could talk about what that looks like, probably at an upcoming meeting of the whole would be
Okay,
best.
great. I just thought that was really important that we talked about it today, but I wasn't sure that it was ready to be a key message or if that was the right way that we wanted to get it out. So as long as it's something we're gonna discuss in the future again and then get out in the right way, I think it doesn't need to be there now.
Okay, definitely, thank you. We usually have our presentations as part of our key message too. Do we want to just share that too? Okay, and then that's it. That's all right, I did. Well, Nikki didn't limit us anymore, so. Thank you, everyone. That's the end of our agenda today. Can I get a motion to go in camera, please? John, Mr. McKee, Trustee McKee. Mr. Trustee McKee at 3:01. Please.
Greg is not.
Oh, where's Greg?
He's girls' nest fast.
Just a motion to adjourn. Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn, please? You're going to adjourn us? All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Have a great night, you guys. See you all electronically next time.